Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be.
Hi, folks. Another week. Thanks a lot for joining me here. Rick Wagner, working to get it right here on KNZZ, KGLN, the Internet, and podcasting. So we're here at 1190.7 at KNZZ and 980 and 101.3 on KGLN. And you can also go to our show page. We have a blog page, which is therickwagnershow.com. And then another one is on our Facebook page, which we have out there, which I can never remember how to get to it, but we publish stuff in there. By the way, there's no selling of anything in there. I don't have any merch at all. I think I should get some kind of T-shirt out there. I had one I gave away a long time ago. I think I may make them again. Anyway, we put some stuff up. Once in a while, I'll write something and put it up there, and you folks are nice enough to comment on it. And I always forget, you can reach me at Rick Wagner. That's pretty much it, one name, at mail.com. So I try and read everything. I don't answer it, but because I just kind of get bogged down. But I do appreciate everything that you guys say. And I get some good ideas, which I try and pretend like are mine. And we just move on. You know, this week, once again, I was struck by, well, many things. The Charlie Kirk funeral, well, how moving was that? That was really something. And the amount of people that showed up should be an indication to those on the outside about what's really going on in this country. And things are changing, and I think for the better. But nevertheless, all it seems to do with some is make them worse. They see it as some sort of battlefield. And I mean, it is a little bit of one, but we see it in a different way, don't we? We see it as an intellectual, political, cultural battlefield. They're beginning to see it more and more like a real battlefield. Partly because, well, mainly because, they're losing the battle every place else. People aren't buying their stuff anymore. By that I mean intellectually. People are turning away from them. They're losing followers. And they can't seem to stop doing the things that make them lose followers. So frustration builds up, and a frustrated loon is likely to go off. And I think that's what we're seeing. The terrible that one of the detainees down there in Dallas was shot and killed. A couple others wounded by that moron shooting from the rooftop over there. I'm curious what type of firearm he used. I noticed the picture that they showed had a stripper clip in it. So it seems to me like something, certainly not a modern sporting rifle, like they used to call as assault weapons. So I'm curious what it is. And also the one that was used in the terrible Charlie Kirk shooting was also a older military-style rifle, which many of you know, and with a .30-06 caliber. Now, and I think I mentioned this before, the news said these things, I think I said this last week, but I'm going to say it again. The news, which is really irritating, said, oh, these military rifles are being poured into the United States by the millions and being sold. That's just stupid. That hasn't been happening for a while. It used to be down, like you could go to a gun store someplace, and they'd get some of these older rifles, and Mosin Ganats, all sorts of stuff like that, right? And some Mauser action things. And now that's pretty much dried up. There's a few out there. But these guys are talking about maybe something the way things were, I don't know, 15 to 20 years ago. Once again, people who don't know what they're talking about, trying to give people information based on wrong. Other thing, things going on in the world that we don't want to explain, like the nuts and bolts to you guys. So I just try and do that. We get policy talk to death, and then back and forth, and one person pops off and they have a panel, and then immediately go to another panel that starts talking about the same thing. That's all fine and good. Sometimes it's interesting, but some of the nuts and bolts really helps you understand things a little bit better. So I did a little research on some of the things that are happening in Ukraine in terms of military technology. And why things are getting kind of, well, the sky is falling over there, and some of it into Russia too. And one of the reasons is the drones, okay? But also, we're starting to see the development of drone swarms. Now, most of us, it sounds like science fiction, but most of us picture a drone as single little quadrocopter, flown by someone with a joystick. But now imagine like 50 or 100 of them, all launched at once. They look like a flock of like starlings, at sunset. Each little machine aware of its own neighbors, adjusting its path automatically, working together without needing a pilot for every unit. Technology behind this is software coordination. The swarm could split itself up. Some drones, I guess, can scout ahead. Others carry little explosive charges. Some radio jamming signals. It's sort of like sending a little mini Air Force into an area. And it costs about as much as a nice pickup truck. Not to say nice pickup trucks are cheap anymore. If you're trying to defend against this, it's just a nightmare. Anti-aircraft missiles could shoot down one or two of these things. But when dozens of them arrive, the cost balance flips, doesn't it? I mean, you're talking about something that costs, I don't know, in an individual basis, maybe $1,000, a couple of thousand to the tops in there on most of these things to build, and you're shooting a missile out of them that costs maybe $120,000. That's not the way you want to exchange battle. That's economic warfare in a very different way. The drones are cheap, the interceptors are expensive. That's why all of the militaries all over the world are trying to figure out how we can get some countermeasures that don't involve us shooting really expensive interceptors into the air, and to say nothing about the fact when you get 50 or 60 of these things, exactly how do you knock them out with one or two? Maybe you have a big enough explosion up there that does something, possibly, but it's starting to get a little funky in terms of trying to defend against these things. Now, we're looking at a bunch of stuff out there. One of the things I wanted to look at was lasers. Now, lasers are developing pretty well, but they're hardly to the ray gun stage. We still have to focus them, and the amount of power generation it takes to make an effective laser that would shoot some distance like this and do damage is a lot. So if they're mobile, they're still pretty big, and they still have to have big power requirements. Remember, light is what a laser is. It loses a high percentage of its effectiveness over space-time. Well, over time and space. So the further away you are in distance, the less of that energy reaches you, just like a flashlight. So they have to be of a certain range, and it takes a lot of power to crank these things out. We're moving on that, I think, in a very effective way to prove it, but it's still a long ways off. We've come up with a couple of different systems. They've been testing them on the missile cruisers in the Navy. They're kind of cool looking. They look like a big mirror floating around on a swivel in there. But the missile cruiser is a good way to sort of deploy them because there's plenty of room for the things to be on deck and to have power supplies to them. And they can fire, once you can get them figured out, you can fire them relatively cheaply once they're generating the energy. But you have to generate the energy. And we're not to where we're going to be able to shoot something out of orbit or something like that with a laser yet, or even that far away. But we're working pretty hard. There are other things that we can try. There's microwave radiation that can sometimes be effective. There's also just trying to jam their own signals. Now, one of the things about the drone swarms now, with this technology we have, this sort of mini AI that goes into these things, is that they don't have to have a coordinated pilot, right? They don't have to be communicating with anybody somewhere else. They're already wired in. They know their mission and they know what to do. So trying to jam them is more difficult because you're not just jamming a signal that's being delivered to them to tell them what to do. They already know what to do. And the little more sophisticated ones can make changes based on the environment. So jamming them is going to involve more than just keeping an operator from using them. It also needs to keep them from being able to coordinate. So whatever communication systems they're using between themselves has to be taken care of. And then there's the idea that for some, it's not going to make a difference. They're going to be programmed to take a certain formation at a certain place and do a certain thing. And jamming them to be good because they're not really coordinating that way. They're already coordinated. Interesting stuff. Anyway, we'll back. Okay, folks, welcome back here. We're trying to get it right here on KNZZ, KGLN, Internet, podcasting, and hopefully some of these radio waves are going into the stars, and millions of years from now, someone on a planet that maybe they'll have ears, we don't know, will hear it and maybe think that they get something out of it. Who knows? Anyway, I know it's speaking quite a bit about drone technology in the first segment, and I hope you guys understand that one of the reasons I'm doing that is because, yeah, sure, it's interesting, at least to me and other sort of techie people out there, or people who just like mechanical stuff, because there's kind of both in there. But the face of warfare is changing rapidly. So the tactics change with it. Eventually, as the tactics become more modernized, shall we say, then the strategic goals change. Because now you're able to do things tactically that you weren't able to do before. So that changes strategic objectives a little bit. Places you couldn't reach before, you can reach now. Things that you couldn't do, now you can do some of it. That changes everything. And we need to kind of be aware of that and understand some things that just kind of drifting up. Like, why is Putin continuing to fight here? And he's, he's not listening to Trump. Well, Trump's pretty good at a lot of this stuff. The problem the president has is that, and we've said this several times, is that, of course, Putin thinks he's winning, and he kind of is. Now, winning in what way? There's a lot of interpretations in that, and we get a lot of crooked messaging out of both sides there. But what thing has changed, and it's very interesting, I think, and important if you're going to understand the nature of future aggression that takes place by some of the nation states, and that is that Russia, for instance, has discovered, and frankly, Ukrainians started doing this out of necessity, and the Russians picked up on it, that they can build small, drone-like, unmanned, low-explosive, high-targeting, functioning weapons, much less than they can build almost anything else. And in the past, a lot of the work that was being done by, missiles, very expensive missiles, long-range artillery, things like that, mortars. You had to get pretty close for the mortar, comparatively speaking. And those things are all expensive as well, but they require a lot of time, money to put together. Some of the drones are so much more effective for not much more money per unit. Russia doesn't have the wherewithal, or I should say the access to much funds like Ukraine does from Western Europe, mainly from us, so they can keep buying raw materials and get them shipped into the country and make this stuff. What their problem is running out of people. I mean, that's just the way this works. I mean, you have to have enough people to be able to run things. Now, with this technology, you can have fewer people to run things, but sooner or later, if things don't go right, you're going to run out of Ukrainians. And you'll probably run out of Ukrainians before you run out of Russians. That's not a good way to think about it in terms of how the world looks, but it's how war works sometimes. Anyway, the Russians have really picked up on this, and they're having things, not only are they making some of this autonomous flight-capable stuff in Russia, but they're also having it made in Iran and in North Korea. Iran is interesting because you remember, and I keep bringing this up because I find it so irritating, that we lost one of our really advanced drones in Iran during the Obama administration, second term of the destruction of Middle America, and we didn't recover it. And of course, as I mentioned before, all the big pointy heads, some of them have military hats on top of their points, but they also, it's okay that we don't recover it because they don't have the technology to be able to understand it. Yeah, they do. Reverse engineering is much easier than figuring it out to begin with. So all of a sudden, drone apparatus that was very similar to what we lost in Iran started showing up places. And I don't think it's a coincidence. Anyway, so this kind of stuff is going to change the tactical landscape, and it's going to change strategic objectives. And it's also one of the things that's making this war hard to stop. Because Putin is having a lot more luck blasting drones into things over distances, evading most of the, what would be anti-missile attempts, Patriot batteries and stuff like that, and doing some pretty good damage. Plus, they can be actually very accurate if they're given the correct GPS ordinances, something isn't jamming them. If they can communicate with each other, they can do the swarms, or they can swarm relatively together even without communicating with each other because they can be programmed to do that. Although that's not nearly as good because that makes them kind of a static target. Yeah, they're flying in formation, and then they're programmed to maybe go this way and then that way. But it's better if they can independently assess the situation or have command drones in there that independently assess the situation and give formation commands to the rest of them. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? That's what happens. And the speed of this stuff, this is what's kind of frightening, is pretty much moving beyond human reaction time. Swarms can make decisions faster than humans can keep up with. They can adapt different routes, different formations, dodging jammers, finding gaps in defenses. It's a whole new era out there. That's going to change how people in some of these countries see deployment of force. Additionally, while we're on the topic, robotics is becoming pretty important on the battlefield. And Ukrainian, Russian forces are doing this. And especially the Ukrainians, because they're using some of the technology we've been messing around with to try and get into the battlefield with robots. Not necessarily the hunter-killer robots we're thinking of, and there's no Arnold Schwarzenegger-looking ones out there. What we're seeing is tracked robots, about the size of a golf cart or a little bulldozer, and they're crawling around under fire. And instead of carrying shells across an exposed land like you would have a soldier doing it, the robot does it. It gets hit, you lose a machine, not a human life. These unmanned unmanned ground vehicles, I can't say machine, are being used for three main jobs: hauling ammunition, bringing food, and in some instances, extracting wounded soldiers from the front. Some of them are remote controlled. You see pictures of the guys in Ukraine, moving little joysticks around with a little screen. That's a little more difficult because we're just getting more and more sophisticated on both sides of that war with jamming each other's communications. But some of those can follow GPS waypoints, just kind of like you could have your car do it, or you could program your lawnmower, right, to go something like that if it had this kind of infrastructure in it. And some of them even have enough sensors that they can navigate around obstacles on their own. Look, if you can have a car that drives itself in San Francisco, you can probably come up with something that's going to maneuver around on the battlefield. And the crazy moment about this is how quickly these things have gone from prototypes to actual reality. Ukraine has dozens of small firms turning these out, welding scrap armor into electric carts or modifying ATVs with remote control kits. It's very innovative. They're not Hollywood's killer robots, I might add. They're rugged, practical machines. And that is fascinating. And it also shows one of the things about progress that is always difficult to swallow sometimes, is that human progress can reach fevered peace during conflict, because conflict forces people at the great loss of life, of lifestyle, their country, whatever the case may be. It focuses their attention on making things that can beat the other side. And it's not lazy. It's not like, well, maybe next week we'll get around to it. No, that's not the way it works. Also, nations are much more apt to take chances, do experiments, do things like that. So technology in general, not just wartime technology, but technology that later on gets transferred into everyday civilian use in many ways, is comes up with it in the battlefield situations. And we're testing a lot of this stuff on both sides. And always remember the Spanish Civil War. Before World War II, there was a Spanish Civil War, which was fought predominantly between forces supported by the fascists, sort of Italy and Germany, and the other side, which is communists, sort of supported by the various countries in communism, which would mainly be your Soviet Union. But that was a testing ground for all sorts of weaponry. I mean, there weren't robots walking around, but they were testing new rifles, new pieces of artillery, all sorts of things that each side was supplying to the military in that area, not only because they wanted to help them out, but to see how they worked, see how they worked against other people's defense measures. This is going on right now. Whole face of this stuff is changing. And as it changes, the way that people conduct policy is going to change too. Because the stick they're carrying, if policy goes sideways, is become different.
What do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt.
All right, thanks for sticking around this long, folks. It's Rick Wagner here, still getting it right, which is not as hard as it used to be because, well, it's never been that hard, but so many things are wrong that kind of lays it out there for us. So I've talked a lot about technology, warfare, stuff like that this time. What does that have to do with the price of peanuts right now? Well, it's because things in the world are changing in ways that we're not really being tuned into, because it's not the explosive, whatever happened today, let's talk about it 50 times, way we do news anymore. It doesn't mean that there's very important news out there. This Dallas shooter is an important news story. It is a national news story. It's not a local news story, so it's being shown as it should be. And so I have no problem with things like that. What I have a problem with is that there's sometimes nothing else than 2 or 3 stories. Now, I know I've gone on about this ad infinitum here, but it doesn't take away from the fact that that's the truth. And things change rapidly that affect our postures overseas, the goods and services we receive, and even things that affect our local lives here. And we're just not getting the information sometimes. This change in the technology and conduct of kinetic military action is a big deal. This is a leap. Before, we used computers to do things, to calculate distances for artillery, obviously for aircraft, GPS, things like that. However, they weren't a separate brain working away on these things. And that's what we're moving into. Now, we all may think of the Skynet scenario from the Terminator, and who knows, that might happen. But I think it's a slim chance. What's a greater chance is that this acceleration we have in technology in warfare is going to cause relationships between nations to change and the conduct between them to change. That will then impact exports, production, industrial output, things like that. And then it's going to affect us. And sooner or later, we're going to have to make the choice about how deep we want to get into someplace with all these kinds of things going on. And are we prepared for it? I'm not so sure we're really prepared for it yet. Now, I don't think that the military ought to be out there telling us what it's doing all the time. That doesn't seem to be very wise. But from what we can tell, we're having a hard time switching our military from sort of a large-scale, sort of post-World War II kind of naval task force way of doing things to some of the more targeted, problematic ways of doing things that we're seeing break out in, well, the Ukraine. We're even starting to see some of them in Gaza. We're going to see more of them. And they're going to start affecting us in, I think, interesting ways. I think that we need to be aware that we're going to see some drone attacks in the country here at, I don't think, very long. Now, should we be alarmed? Yes and no. There have been loons out there trying to blow things up for a long time. Let's go back and look at the Weather Underground, look at some of the things that took place in the 30s, the whole 60s kinds of situation. Luckily, people were as inept in many cases as their philosophy, but it's still a troubling time because now some technology is becoming available and the ability to use the technology has been becoming available. By that I mean that people who don't have to be trained as much can use some of these things. And that's because the whole purpose of AI and this type of technology, large language models and stuff, is to make life easier for people, is to be able to tell it to do something and it does it. It doesn't have to be directed all the way. That's the point of it. Well, on the other side of that, it begins to get to a point where you can tell a artificial intelligence artifact to make something, do something, or whatever, and you don't have to have the knowledge really to direct that. It has the knowledge to direct it, and it does it a lot faster than a human can. Now, we have all these safeguards we're trying to build into the systems, right? Some of them are clumsy. Those of you that have used some of the AI platforms out there to mess around with know that some of the guardrails, it's fine to have guardrails, but they're just silly. Some of them decide that what's being asked has something to do with violence when it doesn't. It's just picking up keywords or something to do with a medical procedure or something that's above your PG-13, when lots of times that's not what it's doing. It's because we've really clamped down on that. Now, or is it going to stay that way? No, it's not. The key is to make it smarter so it understands the context of what people are asking, not just try and buzzword a few things so that when you ask it something that seems completely innocuous and it comes back saying, well, I can't do that, that happens less often. But nevertheless, we're going to have trouble controlling how this gets used. There are people out there that are going to tap into these models and emulate them. And some, of course, national actors, Chinese, North Koreans to some extent, Russians, obviously. And don't discount the Middle East. These guys aren't fools. They'll get the technology if they can. Now, a lot of their problem is they have too much internal issues. Iran's problem is that it has so many internal issues and has to focus so much internally in terms of its, your military police type conduct, that it's hard for it to field much of a ground force. In other words, it's all tied up trying to control its own population. This is in some ways the same thing with North Korea, although they're a little better because they don't care at all about their population, and that's a troubling foe to have on the other side. But these things are going to continue to gestate out there, and as they do, we need to know who is in the best position to handle this stuff. And that just doesn't mean the president or the vice president, but certainly your congresspeople. I mean, if you know anything about what's going on in the world, technologically in terms of the dangers that it possesses, or it can create, it just does, in itself it's not dangerous. It's how it gets used. It's like gunpowder. There's a lot of good uses for gunpowder. You have to control how it gets used. Dynamite, the same way. So that's kind of the approach we need to take. But in order to do that, you need to have some people looking at the problem that aren't complete fools. And we seem to be pretty good at electing people like that. Some states are better at it than others. California seems to be leading the nation, although New Jersey and New York have been coming in pretty close. Maryland, I think we could probably think of Minnesota is right in there too, if you look at some of their leadership and some of their programs. These are not smart people. They're just not. Or if they are smart, they're doing a really good job of camouflaging it. But they are good politicians, they're good campaigners, they're good at raising money, they're good at trying to say things that they think people want to hear. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do any of them. But unless the population, which is us, starts trying to say, look, I need a smarter person in there, okay? Even though I may like you and think that you do well in terms of what you like, your morals and your moral fiber in that way, if you don't understand what's going on and you're not tuned in to some of this rapidly changing stuff in the world, you're not very effective. Now, are you better than somebody that is tuned in, but it's really kind of got a problem that hurts us? Oh, I think there are 2 or 3 representatives like that. Yeah, you don't want that. We're going to have to start insisting on people be a little smarter. I mean, I'm not saying we expect to see the Congress filled with Jeffersons and Madisons, but would be nice to see if it wasn't full of Shep and Moes. That would be a big help. Plus, just the usual graft and sort of dishonesty that sort of runs through politics in a pretty meaningful way and always has. And the same thing's going to happen in your local elections. I harp on this all the time. I read news stories across the western slope where I'm at about local governments going to do this, going to do that, oftentimes with new technology. And if you know a little bit about the technology, you think, this is not going to work out right. Partly because government's too slow. Technology is fast. Government has a tendency to have people who are mired in their positions, not because they're showing a lot of merit, but because they've been in their positions a while. That's not the sort of meritocracy that we can have anymore. The pace of everything has picked up again. It's no different than the change that took place in the 50s and 60s. If you look at it, a whole gear got shifted into society in terms of the rate of change. If you look at the way things changed, say from 1865 to 1910, let's say, and then you look at the way things changed from 1945 to 1960, you'll see that not only was there a lot of change, but the rate of change was much higher. And that continues. The rate of technology change, social change, and cultural change, all of which is banded together. Let's face it, technology, information technology, if you want to call TikTok and things like that information, has changed the way people behave. And by that is, you don't have to be very old to remember when you went places and they actually had particular character. I mean, people dressed, acted in a different way than other people, right? Because that was their culture and they didn't know that much. They weren't inundated with other people's. Now there becomes this weird national culture that comes floating across on TikTok, lots of the internet, cable programs, you name it, so that we have this weird homogenization of the country that comes up in the form of everybody kind of being the same way about a few things, dressing the same. I mean, if you would have been a hip-hop artist in 1984, maybe, which was, really not a hip-hop time period, but you wouldn't be able to go to medium-sized cities all over the United States and see people dressing like you or doing the same kind of music as you. Now that's not the case. It doesn't mean it's good or bad. To my way of thinking, it's not great, but I mean, that's what's happening. The styles and sounds, cultural slang, all this kind of stuff is a barometer for how fast society is changing. And we have to have people in charge of things that understand that. And that means they can't be dumb. Now, I know there has to be places for dumb people, and we've certainly tried to fill those people's lives up with work by placing them in government, but that time is kind of sliding away. So we're going to be already jumping into the 2026 elections. I know, we're always into election cycle. And the Democrats are going to be trying very hard in many places, in the West, certainly in a few places in the South to try and break through there. California, I don't know what's going on in California. It has become its own failed state. I don't mean state like United States. I mean like country. I mean the disparity between how things are handled in California and, let's just say, I don't know, Montana, it doesn't seem like it's the same country. And they don't seem to want to change in California. They're sort of resistant to it. People have a certain amount of power and ideas about power, and they're not going to let loose of either one of them very quickly. What's happening is it's causing them to shift away. I mean, you got Gavin Newsom, he's just the sort of hair-gelled, room temperature IQ spear point for this. He advocates for programs and ideas that first are demonstrably failed. Secondly, that many of them that he advocates for have failed under his supervision. Doesn't seem to affect him. That's something you got to say. You just take the hits and keep right on coming. But see, the hits don't come because nobody holds him accountable. Certainly not in his area. So he's created this strange, radical environment there because he's not very smart and he thinks he has to set himself apart from the other candidates that want to be president. Newsom as president is the kind of idea that says, well, you know, that Caligula guy seems like he might do a good job. Yeah, that's that kind of thinking. But at the same time, he can raise money, he has a profile, and he can say things to people that he can't possibly do, but they don't know that. And that's always the problem. It's always easy to promise things that you can't do, and once you get into office, you blame somebody else for why you can't do them. This is pretty much politics since, I don't know, probably the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia, something like that. At any rate, so I talk about this stuff because it puts us at a crossroad in the acceleration of time and change that we find ourselves in. And we have to have people assist in helping that. Now, that also means that we have to become more adroit at it too. Everybody would like to think that government should run by itself, right? We get together every 2 or 4 years. We find somebody that seems like, they kind of got their act together, and I don't think they need it. And we send them off, and then we kind of go back and do what we're going to do with our lives. That's the hope. Unfortunately, that's never been exactly what's happened. And because of that, we've just gotten kind of used to it. The idea was how much damage they can do. Well, as the rate of change increases, their inability to meet that change and understand what's going on means that they can do more damage than before. There's more opportunity for it. Just remember, the evil sometimes rests. The stupid are stupid all the time. They have a lot more time to be able to work on these things. So, when you watch some of the politicians we have in office now, not just from their political standpoints, but their ability to handle complex ideas. And I don't mean really complex ideas. I just mean relatively simple complex ideas, most of which are the same types of things you handle on a daily basis. Especially if you have a small business of your own, or a ranch, or a farm, or if you're in any kind of management, or if you're just working for a living, you make a lot of these decisions at a lower level in terms of money or whatever the case might be. But in most cases, if you look at it, you're much more tuned in to the production of what those decisions make than it seems like politicians are. And that's because there's no accountability. We've let accountability slip away. Part of that's because our media likes some of the unproductive things, apparently, that the left has been doing, so isn't going to report on their failures. Secondly, they're failing themselves, and so their ability to even figure that out if they wanted to is a lot less. So that puts more of an onus on us. I mean, for instance, if you can watch Gavin Newsom complain because they're cutting back on the money for his high-speed rail system, that I think is what? Is it 17 years old now? It's at least 12. That was originally budgeted, I think, at $3 or $4 billion. It's now been $102 billion, and there still isn't a single rail that's been laid. There's been some big structures built that I suppose in the future people will dig up and wonder what they were for. Like, wonder what those people were using those for. Some sort of probably religious ritual, I'm thinking. But if you look at something like that, how in the world can you think that he thinks he's doing a good job? Or more to the point, how do you think the people who vote for him think he's doing a good job? That's what's frightening. I mean, when you read authors, one of my favorites, of course, from the 20s and 30s, and well known for the poison pen and quick wit was H.L. Mencken, he's got some great observations about politicians, politics, and the American public that is still true today. And when you read through it, you understand his problem is really twofold. One, he has a terrible problem with corrupt and inept politicians. But beyond that, he has a real problem with people that continue to vote them in. He just can't understand why. There's a lot of reasons for that, probably. Some of it's sloth. We're all slothful. We'd like to have somebody else do the job. They say they're going to do it. So, okay, here, we'll let you do it. And then we just don't check on them. Government has tremendous failures rapidly, just like any business. But they don't learn from them because there's no consequence. If they blow a whole lot of money on something and it doesn't come about, how often do you hear about it? How often is something done about it? How often does that actually ride with them into the next election? Not very often, especially anymore. Oh, some meme may get attached to them or something like that. But beyond that, we're really not getting where we need to be in terms of new way of addressing things in this world. And you folks are the key to it. It's not me. It's not even these guys in, Savile Row's sort of suits or whatever is going on out there. It has to be you. Because an informed and working populace is the only solution to bad government or improving government or even keeping a good government good. So that's why it's important to know some of these tangential things about how things are changing in the world and why we need to make sure that we're at least slightly aware of them so we can see how our elected representatives and other people who are supposed to be taking care of these problems are doing something about it so that we can respond and get them out of there if they can't do it. We have people in government right now that obviously haven't been able to do this job for a long time. They keep showing up in there. Now, not all of us can, vote Nancy Pelosi out of office, but at least we could all agree that she doesn't know what's going on. And if she doesn't know what's going on, she's pretty tricky, and I'm not so crazy about that either. Just something to think about, folks. We'll talk about it next week.
Listen, if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickwagnershow.com. Both of them take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.